Hello, I'm Bob Listenby, Administrator of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention in the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. We're here today to talk about the expungement of juvenile records, an issue that's near and dear to my heart. We're talking about it in conjunction with my colleague Ron Ashford from HUD, where they have joined with us to develop a unique initiative that's focused on expunging records of young people who are connected with housing authority programs. Ron, why don't you tell them a little bit about the work that you're doing over at HUD?
Good, thank you very much. Let me say, I'm Ron Ashford. I work at HUD and the Office of Public Housing. I'm the Director of Community and Supportive Services. So when you think of HUD, you think of housing. There are people in housing, and all the services really comes under my office. But I want to start by saying I'm also the member of the HUD representative to the Federal Reentry Council. And so as part of that council, we meet with folks who have come out of prison all the time. And there's one statement that somebody said that has stayed with me, and that is that once you are arrested, that record stays with you forever, right? And it doesn't matter whether you did 15 years in jail or you got community service, you have a record. And every time you go to get a job, every time you go for housing, every time you go for any number of things, you have to disclose that record. And we know that a lot of times when you do, your application goes in the trash. So having the money from Department of Justice allows us to have housing authorities work with legal aid organizations and address expungement, but also address the fact that you may not be able to get a driver's license, and address the fact that there are other collateral consequences to having a record, so that the housing authority and the legal aid organization can work with young people to get past those barriers. So, Bob, if you can talk a little bit about the process of expungement.
Ron, let me start off by first saying that this initiative focuses on young people who are 25 years or younger, and it's focused on juvenile records. A lot of folks have adult records, and most adult records cannot be expunged by law, but there are some misdemeanor records that are up for expungement in certain jurisdictions. People need to know that. Also, for most places on the adult side, if you were found not guilty or your case was discharged without prosecution, those kinds of records can be expunged. If you can't get your records expunged, and folks need to recognize this, there are also opportunities for having records pardoned by governors and other political leaders in various kinds of jurisdictions. So I just want to add that. An expungement is this. When a young person comes into a juvenile justice system, assuming they go all the way through, they come out the other end and they have a record. A record is fingerprints, photographs, DNA records, and then a computer record. It's important to understand that those records also include psychiatric records, treatment records, psychological records, education records. These records are contained within the public defender's office, they're contained within prosecutor offices, probation offices, court offices, the state police, the city police, the schools. The records are everywhere. And so when a young person decides that he or she wants to get a second chance and have that record expunged, which the law in the state I came from allows, you have to find a way to go forth and have every one of those people notified that the record needs to be expunged. And a lot of young people would go out, they would go to get jobs. They would go to get basic entry-level jobs. And what they found out is that if they had records, they were often not permitted to take the jobs because the employers would not hire them. And I've had countless numbers of young people come back to me and say, look, Mr. Listenby, you told me that the records, juvenile records, could not bar you from getting employment, which in Pennsylvania is true. It's not true in every one of the 50 states, the 5 territories in the District of Columbia that we supervise policy with from OJJDP. But in Pennsylvania it was. And a lot of young people would come back and say, you said that, but they just fired me because I have a juvenile record. And we'd have to send them a letter saying, look, you can't do that under our law. But what young people need to know is that there are opportunities for second chances. We were there to help them, and now we're working with you and other like-minded folks across the nation to try and find ways in many different avenues to have record expungements and sealings and other kinds of activities for young people.
One of the things we did say was expungement / clearing of records / sealing of records, because not every state apparently does expungement. So can you talk a little bit about what the difference might be and how state laws might vary?
Yes, Ron, there are a lot of myths out there about expungements. One of the biggest ones is that once you turn 18, your records are sealed and nobody can see them. Or once you turn 21, nobody can see them. Just not true in many locations. Now, the rules vary from one state to another, and you really have to find out what the local practice is and what your state rules are. But in most places, it's not true. In the jurisdiction that I worked in and in many other jurisdictions, a lawyer has to file a motion. That motion has to indicate the records that are being expunged or sealed. And then there has to be a court hearing where a judge decides that, according to the law, that record can be expunged or sealed. What does that mean? It means that all the records that I indicated earlier are shredded, destroyed, removed from computers. And it means that in the final analysis, the only records that remain are the following. One, if there is DNA records typically remain in almost all the states. There are some cases in some extraordinary circumstances where they can be removed. Also, you would find that there are records regarding sexual assault cases, certain types of sexual assault cases under the national law, the Adam Walsh Act, that cannot be expunged because of what the requirements of the law. And so it's important for people to understand that that's also true. Now, a lot of young people think that records are sealed and you can't really see them even when they're in juvenile court. They're 12, 13, 14, 15, and so on. Laws vary, but in the last decade or two, a lot of states have opened those cases up so that you can go and look at juvenile records after people are 14 years old. Certain kinds of records, when they're felony records, are open to the public. You know, the public can go get them. There are many private agencies that simply accumulate all the records electronically and sell them. And so when it comes to expunging the records, it's very difficult for practitioners to go out and have those particular records expunged.
So I am going to follow up on that question. In fact, let me do it right now, because I understand that, you know, when I go online and something will pop up and say, you know, find out who was ever arrested, right? So if someone gets their record expunged, are these companies that hold these records, are they supposed to, I'm sure they're supposed to clear it up, right? Do they? Do we have an issue here?
We have an issue. When young people come into the juvenile justice system, a lot of things happen at the front door. First of all, we have new practices going on across America where some young people are taken into custody, but they're not arrested. We have what's called pre-arrest diversion. They're sent to prevention programs. In those cases, there are no records generated, no photographs, no fingerprints, no DNA. Often these are low-level offenses. We have a different kind of program, civil citations in Florida, widespread across that state and other places as well, where instead of getting arrested, children get a citation. They go to a location where they can have evaluations done. Their risk and their needs are assessed. If they have substance abuse issues or mental health issues, they're given an opportunity to address those needs and issues. There are no records generated there either. Records are generated when young people are arrested. They come into the custody of the police. They are charged with certain kinds of offenses. Those offenses are documented, and then they come into the system. Even if they're diverted then, and they're not found guilty, they still have records, and they need to go back and have those records expunged. A lot of times, in a substantial number of cases in jurisdictions, young people come into the courts, and their cases are simply thrown out. The case is not made out. They still have a record, and often the charges are there for people to examine. So young people and families need to be aware that these are the kinds of things that we're really talking about. Whether found guilty and adjudicated delinquent or not, those are still records, and we want to find ways of addressing it.
Okay. So one of the things I do want to say is that HUD came out with some guidance. I don't know, I'm sure you know this, right? And the guidance went to housing authorities and multifamily agencies that said, you may not use an arrest to deny someone housing, public housing or HUD-assisted housing, because an arrest is something that happened, but what actually happened, right? So the idea is that the arrest is a trigger, and you look at the conduct underneath the arrest, but we know that in a lot of instances, people get arrested and charges are dropped, they're not filed, but yet that can stay on your record. So it really harms you.
It can be very harmful to a lot of folks. Let me add some of the other things that are harmful that happen to young people. A lot of young people don't know that if you are adjudicated delinquent of certain offenses, you may lose your driver's license from 90 days to 3 years. A lot of young people don't know that if you want to get into the military, that if you want to get into the Army, an adjudication of delinquency for a juvenile offense is the equivalent of a conviction on the adult side. If you want to get into the other services, You may have to, if you have a felony offense, go to the Secretary of Defense in order to get into the military. So that's something that's very important for young people to know. Right. In addition, there are other kinds of challenges. A lot of young people think that and are aware that if you get arrested for certain kinds of offenses, you can get expelled from school or suspended from school. Mm-hmm. If you want to go to college, they may ask you in the common application or other application processes, have you ever been arrested? And you have to put that information down.
So if somebody goes for employment or they're applying to college and it says, have you ever been arrested, but you know that your record has been expunged, you can then answer no. Am I right?
Well, you know, it really becomes a little tricky. Right. Under the law, in some jurisdictions, the answer is you do not have to tell them you've been arrested. Right. However, if your record has not been expunged and they find out, it may be the kind of thing where they think you've been deceptive, and it may lead to you being dismissed. And that's, in an at-will state, it's very difficult to get rehired.
So and these are exceedingly informative questions, does someone get a certificate that says my record has been expunged?
Well, it varies from one state to the next. And again, there are 50 states, right. 5 territories, District of Columbia, so there are 56 different kinds of ways. Right. But one thing we found very useful is to have an actual letter from the court saying that the record had been expunged, and we would send those letters out to our clients. And I found that very useful. Not a certificate per se, right. but a letter signed by or sealed by the court, depending upon what the method is in the local jurisdiction.
Okay. So the other question I have is, what kinds of records can be expunged? In my mind, it's misdemeanors and violations and not felonies, but I don't know that for a fact. Can you tell me what kinds of offenses can be expunged?
Prior to the arrival of the latest Adam Walsh Act in Pennsylvania, which was about 3 years ago, the rule was that any juvenile record could be expunged. Okay. Aggravated assault, robbery, burglary. Right. With the advent of the Adam Walsh Act, there are certain limited sexual assault cases that cannot be expunged.
Okay. Right. So I want
to that's just one state.
Right. There's just one state,
and that includes felonies. And right. By the way, some felonies can be expunged. Okay. The idea is, how do you get a second chance if you can't have all the records expunged? Right. And that's what Pennsylvania did, and a lot of other states do. They want to give young people a true second opportunity at a good, clean slate. Right.
So some of the pushback I've received, because I have received some pushback, right? And people have said, well, wait a minute, somebody did this horrible thing, and now you want to clear their record. And what I've said is that, well, there's a process involved, and you actually have to be clean for a period of time before that record can be expunged. Am I right on that?
Again, every state's different, but absolutely right. You're absolutely correct. Right. The jurisdiction I worked in, it was 5 years after you have been dismissed from court supervision, right. You are eligible to file for an expungement.
Right. If you have not done anything in between?
If you did not have a pending open case, mm-hmm. and if you've not been adjudicated delinquent on another juvenile case, right. and if you do not have an adult criminal record. Right. So any one of those things would bar you from getting your record right. expunged.
So I think this is important for everyone to know, including our housing authorities, that we are not saying, you know, someone comes back, they just did this thing, and let's clear their record. You have to actually earn that expungement, right? And I think that that's important for our housing authorities.
It's also important for people to understand that the new science around adolescent development says that most young people age out of delinquent behavior, often without any intervention whatsoever, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. and that most young people are engaged in delinquent behavior because of adolescent kinds of impulses. They're impulsive, they do not understand the long-term consequences of their actions. They're also engaged in this kind of behavior because they're engaged with peer groups that take them in the wrong direction. Right. And that once they have had the proper interventions with prevention programs and other kinds of things, or once they have particular kinds of needs addressed. Mm-hmm. Over 50% of the young people coming to the juvenile justice system have substance abuse issues. Mm-hmm. Over 60% have mental health disorders, diagnosable right. disorders. Right. And so they need to have those needs addressed, and once those are addressed, their delinquent behavior usually tapers off. We need to recognize, for example, with certain extremely vulnerable populations, girls, for example, who are in our juvenile justice system are usually coming into the system after having been assaulted physically and sexually. So they're suffering from various kinds of traumas that often lead them to act out one way or another. We have a lot of young people coming to our system, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, who've been bullied and who've been victimized. We need to recognize that and recognize that we can provide the proper kind of care and treatment, usually trauma-informed care, so that they don't stay in the system. But when they come out, we want to give them a second chance as well. We have a lot of young people in our juvenile justice system who have experienced disabilities, and we want to make sure that we address their issues and concerns and move them forward out of our juvenile justice system, giving them a real second chance to find the kinds of job opportunities and educational opportunities so they can move into the middle class.
So it sounds like what you're saying is the Housing Authority legal aid connection that we've asked our housing authorities to do, work with the legal aid organization, we really need to expand that to beyond just the Housing Authority and the legal aid organization, but some of those other counseling agencies that can help address some of those other issues.
Well, when young people come out of the juvenile justice system, it is imperative that we focus on assuring that the systems of care that they're going to know what their needs are and address those needs. Our research tells us that a substantial percentage of the young people who leave our juvenile justice system, even though the needs have been diagnosed and assessed, that those needs are never addressed. And so we need to make sure that we improve our system so that's done. And that's one of the things we're working on here at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention.
So I want to thank you, Bob Listenby. This has been awesome. Thank you very much.